What do CEOs need to know about sales these days? A lot. Outdated sales strategies and tactics plague most companies today. Listen to what innovative CEOs and experts have to say about how to change all that with Sales Talk for CEOs. Every CEO that I know wishes they knew what was going on inside the head of their sellers, especially their very best sellers, but certainly those who are not doing as well. I think that in order to have a peak performing sales team, it's really important for the CEO and the sales leaders to be conscious of what is going on inside those precious minds that do the selling for us. And so today I'm excited to have with me Spencer Wixom from the Brooks Group, who specializes in understanding what salespeople are thinking, their mindset, their communication, and many of the other things that make them peak performers. So welcome, Spencer.
Thanks, Alice. It's great to be here. Great to be on this.
So, in your own words, I think you can tell everybody a little bit better than I can exactly what you do for companies to help them really increase their sales.
Yeah. So the Brooks Group is, we're kind of a traditional sales training and transformation company, but we take a different view of things. We, first of all, take a really deep dive or look into the communication and the motivation of salespeople, as well as their mindset and their mental clarity in doing the job. And we use all of that assessment and that analysis in helping develop them, in particular, to follow a simple guided sales process to achieve success.
Sales process is so important. When I interview salespeople and ask them, what are you doing? What is your process? A lot of times in a company, each salesperson will tell me something different. And so I go back to the leaders and I say, we'd have a lot more success here if we put some process in place that we can step through. And that process, of course, needs to match the journey that the buyer's going on. And the sellers, instead of kind of doing their own thing, right? We can really do a better assessment of what's happening and where it's breaking down if we can get everybody going the same direction.
Yeah,
So,
it's interesting. Do you mind if I just share with you really
yeah,
quickly? As you talked about process, I've been in this line of work for many years, developing
you and me
Salesforce.
both, Spencer. You and me both.
Yeah,
These gray hairs that are hidden by the my great hairstylist, right?
but it was interesting because many years in, I had the opportunity to teach undergrads sales at UT Dallas. I was there with Dr. Dover. I'm sure you know Dr.
Yes, my
Dover.
good friend Dr. Dover.
And he gave me this fantastic opportunity to teach fundamentals of selling to undergrad students. And I had always, I'd worked in Salesforce optimization. I'd worked in training salespeople, evaluating their tool sets, all of those different things. And as I worked with these undergrads in really building from scratch their capability in sales, it really came home to me the importance of consistent, fundamental, simple process.
Right.
We would work through things like objection handling, and we realized, it is just so important to have a couple of principles of objection handling that you get to almost the point of being able to do it like you walk, right? Just naturally manage that process every single time. And we do the same with discovery, and we do the same with opening a meeting, and we would do the same with closing techniques. And I realized the importance of having those just simple fundamental principles and reinforcing those with your sellers. And I believe, and I've seen this in practice, there's a lot of sellers out there who have been doing this a long time who are struggling right now because the game has changed, the field has changed, buyers' behavior has changed. Back to those fundamentals and say, how much have I strayed from following those fundamentals
Yeah.
consistently in all of the work that I'm doing?
Yeah, talking to CEOs and sales leaders as I do all the time and asking them, what's happening in your organization? Now, most of the clients that I work with are doing really well, which, that's tremendous. And I'm excited for them. And I hope that that's in part due to my help. But when I'm talking to them about, what they're struggling with and what's hard, a lot of times it does come back down to process. But I know you have done some research on this recently. And so I'm curious, when you ask that question to uh, a wide sample, and you can tell us how big that sample set is, what are you struggling with most? What did they tell you?
Yeah, so we've gone out to a few hundred people this year, and this is most of our audience, and they're individuals in senior sales level roles, sales enablement roles, even some executives and CEOs. And we had them just identify what is the number one thing you see as the biggest struggle in your sales force right now. What's interesting, of course, is it's a bit of a fragmented um, data set in that they answered a whole bunch of different things, but they really fall into about 6 different categories. The number one at about 28% of this population was prospecting and discovery. It's engaging those buyers on the front end. That's what the plurality of organizations are struggling with right now.
Well, let's
Number
stay on that
two,
for just a second
oh
before
yeah,
we go to number 2, because I think that's interesting because I've heard the same thing. And I feel like sometimes the CEO and the sales leaders forget what their role is in sales, right? And
yeah.
so I keep hearing the salespeople are struggling with prospecting and the very top of funnel stuff, getting somebody on the phone and getting them engaged in the conversation so they can determine if there's a fit to move forward, right? So that's what you're saying. Absolutely, 28% said they were struggling with that. I hear it every day. You look on LinkedIn, you'll see posting about the same thing. People are trying to help others do a better job with prospecting and the discovery, right? So it's obviously true that that's a problem. So if you think about what is the CEO's role, it's really to remove friction so sales can do their job, and removing that friction so the leader can lead, they can manage and coach the sellers to get them to be able to do these things. When you really think about how hard prospecting is today for a myriad of reasons, I really want the leaders to check in and say, what am I doing or not doing that's making my salespeople frustrated, and why are they struggling around prospecting and discovery? It's a big important question to ask because you just proved it with your study. I hear it every day. It's all over LinkedIn. So what is everybody doing about it? So we'll probably have to get to that in a minute, but
Well, no,
it's
I
just,
mean,
you
let's
know,
stay on that one for a minute
all
because
right.
it is really interesting. So we did a study specifically on prospecting recently because we wanted to understand it, and there were two primary things that we learned in this that I thought were really interesting. Number one, so from a CEO's perspective, or even a head of sales perspective, I think oftentimes they're like, okay, it's not working. We got to find something wholly new to do, right? We need to find that absolutely like new
Right.
greenfield activity that we haven't done before to try. And some organizations might say, look, we've been calling and emailing. Let's go on to social, or let's, send gifts or, direct mail or something like that. Something we haven't done before to try. They think
Mhm.
they can shift activity, pull a new activity lever, and that'll make the difference. What was interesting is we asked buyers, hundreds of buyers, like, what is the mode you want to be engaged in? Like, what's the method for outreach that will engage you? And the primary ones are still the primary ones. They'll take phone calls, they'll look at emails, they'll even read text messages. Those were the big ones. So
Still the
I
primary.
think, oh, sorry, go ahead.
It's still the primary, and yet we're not getting through, and it's because our messages are not about the buyer and what they care about, and
Well,
so
you're absolutely
we're not
right. And so
breaking
what the
through.
organization needs to do, what senior leaders, including the CEO, need to do is don't be pushing a wholesale change in activity. Look very closely at what's the quality of the message that our people are going out with. Because at the end of the day, those same buyers, so we first of all asked them, what's the mode of communication you want to engage
Yeah.
in? And they told us it's the same fundamental things we've been using.
Mhm.
But secondly, we said, what will make you highly likely to respond?
Yes.
And it's basically it's relevant to my business. The message is
Mhm.
relevant to my business, and it's coming from somebody I trust. And that's the
Yeah,
big problem, right, in cold outbound is we haven't built that trust.
right.
I think if we do well in our inbound outbound mix, if we're feeding good digital content out there and trying first to help and to educate as opposed to sell, we can build that trust over time, but we have to expect that it's going to take some time. It's going to take some effort to build that.
Right. So, newsflash for anyone who doesn't know this, CEOs, if your team is not following what I'm going to say next, you need to make a change. So, you just heard Spencer say that buyers do want a phone call, an email, or a text. They want a message that matters. They want, you know, some context and, to know and trust, right? So that they feel comfortable. The best way to do that is through introductions, referral selling. And I know because I ask all the time that most companies do not have a formal referral selling program. And so what they're doing is making sales really hard because they're only uh, doing cold outreach and they're depending on that. And as we know, first you have to do it really, really well. And even when you do it really well, you need tremendous volume to get results. So it's not the best way. And even if you can combine your cold outreach that is high quality, good messaging, cold outreach with a referral selling program, right? Your results are going to increase dramatically because anytime I can get an introduction. It's a beautiful thing. The person's going to take my call. They're going to talk to me. If I'm sending an email and saying that Spencer introduced us and, uh, they're going to schedule. So I have a much higher chance of getting that first meeting. Yes, I still have to do a good a discovery call and have a great conversation if I wanted to move forward, but at least I will get that first conversation way faster than I will on cold outreach. So I think it's something to look into for everyone out there. Just think about how you can put a formal referral process right into your selling process. So before they go after a list cold, they have to look for someone who can introduce them. I mean, look, all day long, if I could get introductions, I'd much rather do that than cold call, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And so many organizations in their cold outreach method, they'll list a bunch of they logo drop, right? Or
Yeah,
they success drop in that initial email. And it's become the point where that is just table stakes. Everybody's going to drop that kind of thing.
right,
But like you said, if there's a way you can connect them somehow in that education, relationship building, trust building process to somebody who doesn't even need to talk positively about you as an organization. They just need to talk positively about the things they've done in their organization that you have potentially supported for, I think, that to strengthen the trust and in the relationship. It's connecting
right.
people to other people of similar issues who are working on similar problems and finding some success in
Right. Well,
solving them.
even beyond that, though, Spencer, we can turn the volume way down when I say to you, Spencer, there's 3 companies that I've been trying to get into. And I see that you're connected to those companies. And I'm wondering if you know someone at each of those well enough to introduce me. Now, I have to have your trust and I have to know you well enough to be able to do that, right? And unfortunately, we don't train salespeople to develop their networks well enough to do that. So it becomes really hard. But if the
Agreed.
senior executives at the company help, it can be done. And that's why I believe in, the CEO as the chief lead generator because they have entree where sellers don't and they can make an introduction. So if mentioning a company and their success or what they would say about you is one thing, but I'm actually talking about, Spencer, will you introduce me to Dr. Dover, for example, and let me tell you, why I want to meet him so you can formulate something to say to him. And then when you say, "Oh my gosh, Dr. Dover, you should meet Alice. She is amazing. She's helped my company so much." Or I've watched her do, great things with sales teams. And he's like, "Oh, yeah, I'd love to meet her." Right. Now, once they say, "I'd love to meet," that's great. But sellers are not getting that opportunity. If you put in a formal referral process at your referral selling process at your company and teach your salespeople how to network and build strong relationships so they can ask for an introduction. And if you leverage your senior executives' relationships, you will get a lot more appointments for your sellers. Now, I'm not saying give up on your cold outreach. I'm saying add this to the pile.
No, I completely agree. One thing I would add to that is it isn't about breadth of network. It's also about depth of network, and it's also about cultivation and warmth of network,
Yeah.
right? Breadth, depth, and warmth of network. And what's interesting is as a seller, you never know when those deep relationships that you have with individuals will cultivate into something great. A couple of years ago, had an individual I hadn't spoken with in 10 years, but we had worked very closely together on a project at a company she was at previously, call me out of the blue because we knew each other, we trusted each other, and walk me into an organization that was then $1 million deal. And you never know, when that depth of network and warmth of network will benefit you. There's one other thing I wanted to add to what we were talking about, which I think is a really important perspective for the CEO to have. And it goes back to something that David Ogilvy originally coined, but Rory Sutherland, who leads market research for and kind of innovations and insights for Ogilvy, talks about in his book, Alchemy. And it's a really important principle. It says people don't buy, or consumers or business to business buyers, I believe this applies across the board, don't buy brand A over brand B because A is better. And think about that. That's what we're always trying to do in our outreach, right? Is I'm better than fill in the blank, right? They buy because they are more certain that A is good. And those are two very different things. I talk about this a lot, but I think it's so important for senior leaders to understand when they're testing the quality of the messaging that's going out. Are we making these prospective buyers, these prospects of ours, certain that we're good?
Yeah.
If they're certain of that, if we can build that certainty, and that's why referrals work so well, because they add to that certainty that you're legitimate, that you're a good person to talk to, that you'll add value to their organization. If they lack that certainty, they're not going to engage. And so we have to always be asking ourselves that question as we're looking at the outreach of, does it create that certainty to want to go to the
Mhm.
next step with us?
Yeah, absolutely. Certainty is a great way to put it. And they have to believe that you are the right solution for them, right? They need
Yeah.
to be certain. All right. So when you've asked all these sellers, what are you struggling with? Not a surprise. The top one was prospecting and discovery calls, top of funnel stuff. What was next?
Okay, so next was sales process. And we've talked a little bit about that, right? The importance of having a consistent process and looking at how, effectively are we following that process when the ground has changed, right? When the game has adjusted for us, are we still following that process, or have we become loose on it? I think it's really easy to relax in following a disciplined process when you have business coming at you that you're standing in the way of. It's much more important, critical, necessary to follow a process in a disciplined way when that business is not going to happen unless you do so. So it's no surprise to me that that's an important one. And then the third one, which is very close to it at 20%, was that selling with value.
Yeah.
That's an important mindset shift right now, right? Like we're not in a position right now, all of us, where we have price insensitive buyers. Everybody is price sensitive. Everybody is looking at a scarce amount of capital that they need to invest in ways that is going to be most beneficial to their business. And they're making really hard decisions all the time. And if we can't show very clearly, definitively and give them certainty on the value or the return of what we're investing in, they're going to hold back.
Yeah.
So that it takes
It's just so unfortunate because I know that salespeople just are not trained well enough around value. And what they think is value is what their company tells them is value about the product. This is
right.
valuable because, this product can do all these things versus what is value to the customer, what's going to make their life easier or better. What's going to make their process quicker, what's going to help them save money, have more profit. So if they don't understand a day in the life of the person they're selling to, it's going to be really hard for them to come up with a value statement or value information that matters to that person. And it won't be the same for everyone because it's not about you. It's not about your company. It's not about your products and services. It's about the value that they're going to receive. And that will be shown in the results that they get, right? So I think that's just such a critical one. And I can see why they're struggling with it.
It's interesting. My good friend Dave Brock tells a really interesting story from his career. And Dave was a senior sales
He's my
executive. And
good friend too, by the way, just saying.
oh,
In case you're listening, Dave.
it's a small well, Dave, I hope you are listening. And I'm going to steal your anecdote, which I think is one of the greatest I've ever heard as it relates to this. I believe he was working for IBM at the time. Forgive me, Dave, if I've got the details incorrect here. But a senior executive at IBM was meeting with some of the salespeople, and Dave was there. And these salespeople had just closed a big deal. And the senior executive in the organization, I think this is a good lesson for CEOs here, asked this question. He said, "What did you sell it for?" And the salesperson answers, "We sold it for $350,000, which was the price of the solution." And the executive stopped him and said, "No, what did you sell it for?" And that shows what the mindset is of the seller, right? It's like, how big is the solution that I'm putting in? How valuable is the solution to me? What that executive was asking was, what is that solution going to do for that client? What did you sell it for? What did you sell it to do? What problem did you sell it to solve?
Yeah.
I think that's a really important question for CEOs to be consistently asking their sales teams. What are you selling this stuff for? What are you trying to get customers to buy our solution to do? And if sellers can start thinking more that way, I think it becomes easier for them to understand value, to calculate value, to talk about value.
Yeah. It's not a stock answer either. There's several answers usually. And, there's probably three or four, probably not too many more than that because customers have a set of problems that you're solving, right? And they're going to be very similar. But if you asked all of your customers what value did they get, from this purchase, and they started to tell you about it, you could categorize those to some degree so that you start to understand, oh, I see. Companies like this buy this for this reason.
Yeah.
This is the value that they see. Companies like this buy it for this reason, which is a little bit different. And this is the value that they see. So I think CEOs and senior leaders should talk about that. And if you're not surveying your customers to find out why they bought from you, please start doing it right away. Do a voice of the customer survey or do a win loss analysis so you can learn these things and be able to train your salespeople with the information that you receive from your own customers about why they're buying from you.
No, you're absolutely right. And I think when you say surveying, I think that's such a critical piece of it, of getting the qualitative stories behind your ideal customer profile. Otherwise, you have this, and a lot of organizations are very proud of their quantitative demographic based ideal customer profile, right? It's certain businesses in these industry sectors that are of this size, that have this many employees and things like that. But nobody has ever made a buying decision as a result of being in that particular demographic.
That just
They,
helps you find companies that are most likely to buy from you. It doesn't tell you whether they will buy. It's the psychographics that you're referring to. It's the other things that are not as tangible and measurable.
Correct. It's the circumstance that they're in that makes them want to do something different, right? And I always like to say nobody ever needed to buy something unless they wanted to do something. So you got to understand what it is that they want to do in
Yeah.
order to play toward the need to buy.
And those trigger events that are popping up in your in your purview, and sellers should be able to recognize, right? Tell you those things, right? So they're going to need this because of that, right? They're
Mhm.
hiring a lot of people, so there's a set of things they're going to need because of that. They're laying off people. They're going to need a set of things because of that. They've had tremendous growth. They just landed their largest account ever. They just took on $2 billion worth of funding. All of those kinds of trigger events, right, can tell us what the value of our product and services will be to them if we're paying attention. And I just think it's missed. All right. Well, okay. Number three is value. So
Okay,
we're at
so
number four.
Number 4 is really interesting, and let's go deep on this one because I think it's a really important one for executives to consider. At 17%, it was adversity and motivation of
Oof.
sellers. So
Okay.
what, where is their head at right now? How are they struggling mentally? Are they clear on their role and what they're supposed to be doing? All of those things. And in our kind of corollary research to this would indicate to us that they're not. So you are very well justified in having this concern as a senior executive because all of the data that we're getting is telling us sellers are not in a good, clear, confident, optimistic headspace right now. At least
Well,
on the average, right? There are some
yeah.
who are doing it, they're making it happen. They may be in particular industries or with particular companies that are winning more. But on the average, we're seeing an atrophy in all of those kind of personal elements of the seller's mind.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about this some more, but why do you think that is? This is a change. So sellers have to be extremely motivated. They have to handle adversity well. They can't feel like it's a struggle. But we do know that we're burning sellers out. And I think some of this comes from there's such large numbers of SDRs, sales development reps, and BDRs, business development reps out there in the field, and we're just burning and turning them, right?
Yeah.
So they probably feel a lack of motivation. They are probably feeling a lot of adversity, that their job is hard and no one wants to talk to them, and they can't get through and all those things. And of course, this is a for us anyway, they're the much younger generation, right? They think differently than we do. But what do you think is driving this?
Well, look, I think there's a number of different factors we need to look at. Number one is it's not 2019 anymore, or 2018 or 17 or 16 or 15, or go back a number of years where we were in in economic environment where availability of capital, where opportunity for growth, all of those things was very different than the environment in which we operate today.
Mhm.
And I think we just have to accept that. We have to tune our strategy to relate to that. I think the other thing is a years long, and Dr. Dover talks a lot about this in his more recent book, the Sales Innovators Paradox. I think I have the title right. We have conditioned over time buyers to react very cynically and standoffishly to our outreach. And so we have to adjust and innovate and change in the way we're going about that messaging, as we talked about earlier, to do that. Otherwise, it's just going to be frustrating to us. I mean, I think there's some generational differences. I think there are very different generational priorities among Generation X versus Gen Y versus millennials. We can talk a little bit more about this.
Yeah, well, one thing that I'm seeing is that they are not motivated by money the way that my generation was, for sure,
That's absolutely
and the
right.
generation after me, which would be the Gen Xers, right? So when CEOs say things like, their sellers are coin operated, I'm like, yeah, you better not believe that anymore. That's old. You know, in your day, when you were older, I mean, sorry, when you were younger, and uh, maybe that is the way it was. These sellers had, a good base, but could just knock it out of the park with their commissions. It's just those days are gone, and I think that we have to think differently. I really firmly believe sales needs a complete overhaul in terms of the way that we compensate and the way we do a lot of things. But there are too many CEOs and sales leaders out there that still believe that sellers are coin operated, and they are not. Most of them, when you ask them, will tell you they are not motivated by money. There are many, many other things that they want. And so then, the leaders say things like, well, that's what we pay them to do. And I'm like, wow, if you think that it's all based on pay, I mean, other people don't do their jobs simply for pay.
They
And,
don't.
and again, I do believe there was a time when there was this mentality around sales, and you could really make a lot of money on your commissions, and you probably still can if you were that kind of seller. But that's just not who the young people are. That's just not the way they see the world, and that's not what they want. And they don't want to work that many hours. I'm not saying they're not hard workers, but they don't want to kill themselves for their employer, even if it means making more money. So we really have to change our own mindsets as leaders around how sellers are motivated. It's not just money.
You're absolutely right. And you know what? We've proved it out in the data. Let me share the data with you on this. That's really interesting. So we study thousands of salespeople every year, and we evaluate their motivational profile. And when you get a population that big, the shifts that you see in the various like elements of that motivational profile tend not to be very large because it's a very diverse population. But as we looked at it pre, during, and post COVID, we saw a pretty fundamental, statistically significant shift. And we saw it in a couple of areas. So, number one, so the 6 elements of motivation that we measure are theoretical motivation. I love to learn, I love books. Um, Aesthetic motivation. I love harmony and beauty in the world. Utilitarian. I love a return on my time. Individualistic. I love to be recognized. Social. I love to serve the common good. And traditional. I love to follow norms and rules and processes. Those are kind of the 6 major elements of motivation that we study. We saw statistically significant shifts in a few of them. And these are they. Individualistic, down 7%. That personal recognition. Now, why? Well, part of that is millennials like more teamwork as opposed to individual work. And we're starting to see more of a demographic shift from Gen Z to millennials out there. Utilitarian, down 5%. Like you said, that strict kind of return on my time, being coin operated. But aesthetic, up 4%. And you know what? You see it on LinkedIn, right? You go through your LinkedIn feed, and gone are the days of the seller saying, I achieved this much against quota, or here I am holding the crystal obelisk of like achievement. And what are you seeing? Like, I am a salesperson, but I also mountain bike and go to the beach and enjoy time with my family. And that is a shift, and organizations, and particularly CEOs and senior leaders, need to understand that motivational shift in their salespeople, or they will disconnect and disengage them.
Yeah, 100%. And we want more women in sales, and we're getting better at having more women in sales, but those women, a lot of them also want to be moms.
Yeah.
And that is their motivation, and they will work so hard and do so well and be so productive if we just understand that they want to work their schedule around their kids, right? And I just had this come up with one of my clients. We had a mom with 3 kids who was getting a divorce, and she just came to the CEO and said, "I really need to reduce my hours." Well, first she said, "I don't think I can work anymore. It's just too much." But she was so good at her job, and we really wanted her to stay. The CEO and I talked this over, at length, and we said, "Well, what is it that you need? What do you feel like you need? Because we know you need to make a living, and this is going to be hard on you to not have a job. So we want to make it possible for you to work." And she just explained to us how her schedule is, and with the baby and the other kids, and we were like, "Great. How about if you work 40%, of the amount of time you were working before, and instead, so cut your hours back to where you're comfortable, and work your schedule. We're not asking you where are you all the time, but here are the things that we need you to get done." And she was like, "Great, I can do that." She is more productive and does as much in that period of time as if she was working full time, because she's really motivated now to get it done and do well and be able to work less hours and still make that money and still be able to be a good mom. Like,
I think that's
why is that so
amazing.
hard? So I think we just don't ask. I think we're still assuming, right, that people just want more money, and it's just really not more money. I mean, we did have to adjust her pay, of course, right? But actually, when we looked at it, it's like she'll make more in commissions to make it up anyway because she's doing so well.
There was that great article in the Wall Street Journal over the weekend. I don't know if you saw it, about that 85% rule, which is we've so been geared to this kind of 100%, got to give 100% to a particular thing. And the idea that giving that 85% to things and balancing out your
Mhm.
life can actually increase productivity and benefit both to the individual and to the organization. And
Yeah. Well, our generation, we used to say, "Oh, I'm giving 120%." You know, it's like 100 isn't good enough.
exactly.
And it's just such I mean, it doesn't work anymore. It's just not a good mindset. And I've just watched so many people burn themselves out giving 120%. And I just know young people don't want to do that. They do want to have that balance, but they also want to have a great career and they want to advance. But yeah, why can't we as employers start to think about, hey, maybe this sales job is split between two people and each of them works 50% and they coordinate together. I've seen that work beautifully. People are like, how can you split a sales territory 50-50? And how are they going to know which salesperson? And it works perfectly. Why? Because they simply said to all of their customers, here's the way we're going to do this. And you're going to get even better, you know, help and everything that you need because of the way that we're doing this. And these two women are splitting this sales territory and it's working out famously. Now, why can't we start to think, wow, let's have some people who work 35 hours a week, some who work 40, maybe some who work 50. Let's mix it up. But I think that these scores would go up for these sellers if they had, the motivation that they need, not the motivation we think they need,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
To be able to really produce. So that's a hot topic, and we could go on forever. But anyway, what's number 5?
Well, it's okay. So number 5 is closing. So this whole idea of customer indecision, this whole idea of deals moving out and stalling out at the final. And look, it's an acute problem. It's a clear problem. A lot of organizations are having. I think the thing we have to recognize, it's the old Julius Caesar mantra, right? Ilia icta, the die have been cast. Oftentimes when we're sitting in a particular month and we've got a week to go and we've
Yeah.
got a bunch of late stage pipeline out there that we're nervous about coming in or not, at that point, the die have probably been cast. And I think as senior leaders, as executives, we have to start really evaluating what have we done from a behavior standpoint, from a process standpoint, from a messaging standpoint, all along to set up these situations. We
Yeah.
have very little control over the actual movement of the wrist to sign the ultimate paper. People do that when they're ready and they're
Mm.
confident, they're certain that this is good for them. We have much more control as we are building up that certainty and that desire early on in the process. It's the
Yeah.
way it is.
Well, I'm famous for saying close dates come from customers, not quotas. Right? And it's a
Yeah.
big problem because a lot of organizations are set up so that it's monthly quota, quarterly quota kind of thing, where it should be sort of more of a rolling, what's our goal for the year and what percentage are we towards that goal? Because our customers don't neatly fall into the dates that we want them to fall into. And it just creates more angst, more pressure on sellers. That pressure creates bad sales behavior because they're like, hey, if you get this closed by this date, or they nag the heck out of their customer to try to get a signature. And I've had, companies complaining to the CEO that the salespeople are just too aggressive, but it's because we've put so much pressure on them to close it on a certain date. So there are so many problems with closing. It's like at the time of closing, if it's not closing, it's too late. Back up the bus. Like what did you do all along the way to get you where you are that it's not closing, right? And
Yeah, I,
so
I always like to think of a B2B sale. I always say a B2B sale is like the sale of a used car, only in the fact that like you sell the person this used car and then you have to carpool with them to work ever after that, right? And so it's like the manner in which that transaction happened matters to a
math,
significant degree around the relationship that's going to happen after that transaction. And we have to keep
yeah.
that in mind. Like
Oh
the
gosh, 100%.
signature, though we love it, it coming in, it is the beginning of a relationship, not the end of
That's
a
right.
relationship.
It's just that's the pressure's put on the close versus thinking, wow, we want to have a lifetime relationship with these people. We want a client forever, not just a client for now, right? And it's just the pressure that we put on salespeople. Now, I know that companies need to hit their numbers, especially if they have investors. Those investors want to see those dollars coming through the door, or they're going to stop investing. There's going to be, repercussions. Somebody will be fired, whatever it is. I get it.
For sure.
If we forecasted better as leaders and we didn't take on the ridiculous numbers that some investors think we should take, and I know that's hard because you tell them no and they say, that's it, that's your number anyway. I got it. But we have to have proof that we can hit that number. It's not just pick a number out of the sky, pull it down and hit it. What is the market proof, right? What percent of market share can you get that makes you believe you can hit that number? And then you work backwards from that, right? And so I think this whole problem around closing is so frustrating for the seller because the company doesn't understand it. The company doesn't understand those sales numbers well enough. And if there's not enough leads, there's not going to be enough in your pipeline. And therefore, when it comes to the end of the month to close, there weren't enough deals in there to start with. And now there's not enough deals to close. So it's not the seller's fault. And I would be hard pressed to say, that they're bad closers. They didn't even get a chance to
Yeah.
close, So, I mean, I think, I have seen some sellers who really just can't ask that final question and get an agreement. But I think if we taught the sellers all along the way to gain the next commitment, what's the next commitment, and keep gaining commitment, then the close is just it's nothing. It's just the next natural action that's going to happen, not an event that we're all waiting for. It's just a natural occurrence. But somehow we don't do that. And in this world of working as a team, like you mentioned, they want to work as a team, and team selling is imperative these days. Senior executives must get involved. The CEO must get involved in some of the deals. Now, not to do the salesperson's job, but to bring in that CEO confidence that's
Yeah.
needed, or to bring in that senior leadership or that subject matter expertise that's needed to make them certain, as you said earlier, that they're making the right decision. So if we really take a look at team selling and we position everybody properly so they're talking to the right people and building those right relationships, and then we're gaining commitment all along the way, we could stop worrying about closing as an event, right? Because it will just be a natural occurrence. And then we can move on to the real important stuff, which is how do we serve you and make you successful using what we've sold you?
Exactly. Just to put kind of my final point on that, the CEO of Microchip a number of years ago, a gentleman named Steve Sanghi. He wrote a great book called The Aggregate Method, and this was all around the turnaround of Microchip, which has been an incredibly profitable, growth-oriented, successful company. Mitch Little ran sales there for a long time. Wonderful guy, great sales mind. Um, in a space that's cutthroat competitive, semiconductor manufacturing. But what the fascinating thing about this book, and I think sales leaders and CEOs need to kind of take this idea to heart, is when you look at an organization and you see that it's broken, it tends not to be a thing that
Yeah,
is broken. And I think here we're saying, oh, we got a closing problem. We got to fix closing problem. Rather, it's we need to do measurably better across everything. And if we can measurably improve in some way everything at the aggregate across our commercial process, the quality of our marketing, the way in which we're engaging in our prospecting, the value that we're adding, the discovery that we're doing, all of those things, if we can improve on those, all of those elements combined, all of the improvement in those elements leads to the outcomes we're looking for. But it's very difficult for us to pinpoint a closing issue and say,
exactly.
we have exactly the medicine that can solve that. We need to look across the entire thing and say, how can we get just a few points better across everything? And we'll find that problem will start to relieve itself.
That's right. That's right. Well, and it's a business to business complex sale. right? It has a long sales cycle. It has a lot of complexity already. It has a lot of people involved. We just have to learn how to guide that better, right? That's our job
Definitely.
these days. I think sellers need to learn how to orchestrate. They have all these players and all these on their own team and on the buying team, right? All these different things that have to happen, and they need to orchestrate better. And we don't even teach that. It's not even a thing, right? So it's really interesting. I could go on again for days, but we're going to run out of time. I'm just looking at the clock real quick. All right. So that was number 6, right? So what's number 7?
Okay, so number 7. So well, actually, that's number 6. That was number
Oh,
5. Closing.
that was number
Number
5. Okay,
6
we're on
is
number 6.
talent, hiring, retention. And again, it's really important to be bringing solid new talent into your organization and assessing that talent appropriately and bringing them in. I think a lot of organizations, though, right now have the opinion, and I think it's the right opinion, is don't be too quick to judge a deficiency in a territory to like some kind of a deficiency in the individual.
Right.
Look for, are there different ways we can support them, enable them, strengthen them? Because you may just be trading out like confused, frustrated, under-resourced heads for other confused, frustrated, under-resourced heads.
No, I see it all the time. So the hiring and retention issue is huge in sales, right? It's just huge. And hiring has become harder and harder to do because we're not very good at it as leaders. We don't have a good process in place in most cases. We might be using internal talent people or external talent people to bring people to us, but we probably didn't write the job description well enough in the first place. So they're not bringing us the right people. I mean, I
Yeah.
could go on and on, right? So let's just say we actually get to hire somebody good. We get them out there in the field and they're not performing. Yes, the first thing we want to do is say, oh, made a bad hire. That person's not the right person. But what we really need to do is look at what are we doing? How can we support them? How could we reduce friction? What can we do to make it easier for them to do their job and be successful?
No, absolutely. And it's interesting because just to kind of put a final point on it is we look at the elements of a healthy seller mindset right now in the personal skills of sellers. And I said before, we're seeing a very consistent atrophy of those across the population that we
Yeah.
study. Some of the ones that are down the most are elements like self-management, resiliency, self-starting, problem solving, personal accountability. Now, those may be a personal issue with an individual, in which case they're not fit for role and we have to move into somebody else. They may be that they just aren't clear, certain, they don't know what to do. And that's where you've got to go back to simplifying process, making process standard, looking at the communication,
Mhm.
the value proposition, all of those fundamentals, and just help them re-engage around the fundamentals. And you may see a lot of that frustration and that confusion dissipate. Now, here's the one interesting thing. Post-COVID, so we've seen all of these personal skills, and there's 23 of them that we look at. 22 of them have been trending downward. One has been trending upward. You want to take a guess as to what that is?
Oh my gosh. When is that? No, I don't even can't even.
It's empathy. It's an empathetic
Oh,
outlook. And that to me, like if we can end this on like a really positive note, that to me is very encouraging. That sellers are more empathetic. They're recognizing the struggle that buyers and the organizations that they sell to
yeah.
are going through. And oftentimes it's because you as a customer, you're having a tough time. We're kind of having a tough time. We're
Yeah.
all trying to adapt to this new world. We can appreciate that. But I think that empathy and that empathetic outlook is at the core of motivating sellers to do more homework, to really dig in, try to understand that customer's business better and find a way to support them.
Yeah.
It's interesting, after we did all of this research, the capstone statement that I kind of came up with around it as I looked at all of the data is I think sellers now and going forward, they are more virtuous, but just less capable. And
Mhm.
if we can strengthen the capability, we're going to get a lot of benefit out of that
Yeah.
virtue.
Yeah. We have expectations and we make assumptions. and we need to stop doing that, right? I mean, it's good to have expectations, but we need to set them properly. Like, so we're just saying, oh, they can't do this, and why don't they do that? And it's like, hey, it's a new world, fresh, clean slate. Let's look at each of these individual sellers that we are hiring now, this younger population for the most part, that maybe has some deficits in our minds because it's not the way we did it when we were young, or whatever it is. But really look at them and see, what do they need to be successful? And are we prepared to provide that to them?
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
you had, mentioned that earlier. We were talking about the motivation. The motivation is different now. So maybe, in your hiring process, start asking some questions about motivation. Um, or, maybe set the stage for, how does this person want to work? And how do they handle adversity, so that you can help prepare them for the type of adversity that they may come across. But really digging in a little bit more to how they work, how they want to work, what motivates them, what's going to keep them happy and engaged. And hey, we can teach the sales skills. Really, I'd rather have somebody who has the right mindset, the right attitude, that, just really loves what we do, wants to help people with, by solving the problem that we solve. And we can teach them the sales skills, right?
We
And
can. Yeah. And you know what's interesting too is we do these assessments when we assess things like you said, communication and behavioral style, motivation, mental clarity. The mental clarity piece of it, the kind of the personal skills and confidence and things like that ebbs and flows as people are in positions or organizations that they feel more comfortable and confident in as opposed to not. But those first two tend to be pretty fixed. Like, we are pretty well wired around what motivates us, what our personality is like, what our communication and behavioral style is like. But we also do a lot of assessment around sales acumen. Like you said, like, do I understand the fundamentals? Do I understand the process and the right things to do in certain situations? And we have a really cool scenario assessment that we use to assess that. And what we'll do is we'll assess people, then we'll train them and coach them and develop them over time, and then we'll reassess them.
yeah,
And you're absolutely right, Alice. Like, we can move the needle around intuiting or understanding the right thing to do in a situation. What's very difficult to move the needle around is whether you really want to do the job in the first place, right?
that's
Or
right.
what natural capability or skills you have to bring to the job, which is why it's really important for organizations to know that about their people early on, so that they can channel them into the right jobs and put them
Mhm.
in something that they're going to be confident and comfortable to be successful at.
Absolutely. My final thinking on this is, if I was, a CEO wondering about what's going on in the mind of my sellers or my sales leaders, or if I was a sales leader wondering, I'd simply ask. That's the first, easiest,
Yeah.
most inexpensive thing you can do. Ask people what they're thinking, ask them about how they're motivated, how they communicate, things like that. But then, secondly, if you have a little more time and money, do some assessing, right? Just there's so many good assessments out there. I know that you provide some, and we'll put the links in for people to reach you. But do some assessing and look at your team as a whole, and how they operate and what they believe, and how they're motivated as a whole, and then look at them individually. And we don't have to motivate everybody the same way. They can be motivated in their individual ways, and we can help each one of them in their own individual way. It doesn't have to be like, oh, we're having a sales contest and this is the prize and everybody should work for that prize. Well, guess what? They're not motivated to work for that prize. So
Yeah.
what about individual prizes that each person could earn if they hit, the goals that you set for them? So I just think CEOs need to be keenly aware that when we have less than peak performing sales teams, all of the things that we've discussed today come into play, and you really need to do some research on your own team to figure out how you can make the improvements. All right. So, Spencer, how can people find you? And then your last words for everyone who's trying to increase the productivity of their sellers.
Sure. So how people can find me, you know what I love? I love connecting with people on LinkedIn. So please reach out to me, connect with me on LinkedIn. I love having conversation there. I love seeing other people's ideas and content on that platform. So
There's only one caveat to that, Spencer. If they connect with you on LinkedIn, they have to say that they heard you on my show.
I'll hold them to that.
And
I
that
will
way
hold them to that.
you'll know how they found you.
Yeah, and otherwise you can connect with me and my organization at thebrooksgroup.com as well. But that's how you can get in a hold of us and that. And it's funny because you asked me that question, and I think I'm just going to go back to what I said earlier, which is there are a lot of good things, good virtues in salespeople, and particularly that are inherent in some of these emerging generations, in the Gen Zs, in the millennials. But like you said, Alice, it's not what we're used to. But it's okay, right? I think those of us who have been around for a long time need to, like you said, kind of break our frame of view and say, maybe there's a new, better way to engage at the individual level, at the team level, at the organizational level, because it is a completely different group of people who are carrying this forward. And in the next 5 years, those demographics are going to shift dramatically. We're going to see a lot of salespeople, particularly in some industries, hang it up in the next 5 years, and they are going to be replaced by millennials and Gen Z. And we have to understand it's going to be a very different work dynamic, but exciting. And there's a lot of great virtues and opportunities inherent in those populations.
Yes, absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more. Thank you so much for spending so much time with me today, talking through all of this. I really appreciate it. We'll put all the links in the show notes so they can find the research that you're talking about, and anything else that you'd like to share with them. So,
Well,
thanks
I
again,
appreciate that. And
Spencer.
thank you so much. I've just had a wonderful time chatting with you. Thank you.
If you enjoyed the show, please like and subscribe. And